Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with Jules Brenner, and we are going to talk about an industrial roll-up. You have, industrialsuccession.com. You're rolling up industrial manufacturing companies, which is here in California, which is really an interesting roll-up you're doing. So I'm looking forward to hearing your story, learning what you're doing, why you're doing it, and kind of letting the world know what you're building here. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited, Ron. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So first of all, we always start with the origin story. The running joke is, how in the hell did you end up on a mergers and acquisitions show, right? So can you tell us kind of your history and what got you into wanting to buy companies? And then we'll talk about what you're buying and building.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out, I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. I was a mechanical and aerospace engineer by background. I kind of in college, I straddled the worlds of the business a little bit. I took business classes, kind of almost went for an MBA at a school. And I just wanted to kind of work in industry. So I moved to one of the largest industrial states in the country, California, partially to escape the bad weather of New York for a bit. And I landed in San Diego actually initially, and I was just essentially just job hunting at the time. So kind of going through that, I was reaching out to companies, everything from your startups building rockets to old school, manufacturers of the industrial economy, metal shops in particular too. I'm literally just looking for jobs, and like as I was going to those metal shops, I found that a lot of them were kind of just telling me how their kids didn't really care for the company, and they weren't sure what the future was going to be. At the time, I wasn't like so jazzed up about it, buying a business, really didn't know much about it. So I didn't think much into it. So I went into industry. I went into industrial technology. I was in hardware companies manufacturing electric trucks. And then I was in a software company up in the Bay Area doing software for electric vehicle systems. And in those roles, I was doing a lot of the business development, going out to, people who were also in old school sectors of the economy, trying to get them to adopt the product. And could explain my business case all day, but lots of times a lot of it was just like, I don't understand this stuff. I don't get it or whatever. And adoption was weaker than it needed to be. So, and I would see that across honestly a lot of other folks I knew that were doing industrial businesses. So it kind of just hit me one day when I was like doing research. I learned about search funds. I was like, hey, well, what if we just buy these companies ourselves? And likely since kids don't want it, there's probably not a lot of like small business buyers that are going after them to start with. So we'll have a competitive edge, and then we'll then implement technology, kind of what we learned from my more like venture capital startup backed environments to see these businesses grow and take a little bit of a fresh approach rather than coming in and just doing operational cutting. We could get a lot of efficiency with software, and that's kind of where it got going, and the ball rolled from there.
Now, did you go down the traditional search fund route where you did a private placement memorandum, raised the initial search funds, and then, raised capital to do the acquisition?
Yeah. So when I started, I was particularly, as I looked at the industrial economy as a whole, and I was like kind of almost immediately biased towards manufacturing and in particular those metal shops, just because I literally was just touring those facilities when I was job hunting. So I figured that I would start there, and do like a manufacturing based roll up. I went to a lot of the traditional search fund investment groups and I told them about this and pretty much, was told that it's, manufacturing doesn't work or it's crazy or whatever variant thereof from every single one of the top funds like that, which to me, like coming from venture capital, that usually means there is a chance for you to take a contrarian way of thinking and essentially find a wild outcome. And that kind of got me more excited to proceed further. So, kind of having the traditional search fund investment groups not being a potential anymore, I then started looking at it through a self-funded search lens. And that governed a lot about size of company that we go after and set the strategy after that.
It's interesting is you have the ability, and not everybody has this ability to look at something and say, "Wow, there's a really defined box here." And when anytime you see anything in most industries and most businesses, if a box is really defined, there's usually errors in that definition, meaning that you looked at it and said, I love the idea where you said you had the contrarian view. It's like, wait a second, why are they looking at it that way? What can we do different from them? What can we do that would, to make these viable? And you continued on. There's a skill set inside of this space that I think overshadows everybody's, whether it's your education or anything else. If you have this one skill set, you'll succeed further than most, and that's tenacity, right? To look at something and go, "Yeah, you say it won't work, but I really think I can make it work, and if I do, I don't have to compete against you."
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think in the venture capital world, you're naturally hardwired to kind of hate competition. You want blue oceans, and well, that's why a lot of VCs they just don't fund stuff that has lots of competition. Whether it's you're early to a market and that there's no competition that way, or you're making a bet that you see something that other people are not, or maybe taking a fresh approach to the industry. So I agree, and it is not that common with search funds to do that, right? They actually try to tell you the opposite, try to buy something that is more mainstream.
When you look at businesses to acquire, a lot of times, most of us will look at there and look at them and go, "Okay, great business, and I can do this, that, and the other to improve upon it." And sometimes it's bringing them up to the 20th century in marketing, or the 21st century, what do you call it? And sometimes it's, just cleaning up their operations and putting systems and processes and moving equipment around where it's more logical. Sometimes it's, bringing in more talented people and newer equipment. When you walked through these manufacturing companies, what was the low hanging fruit? Where you, you know what? If I got my hands on this, we could do X, Y, and Z and make it better.
There's a lot, without maybe going into like the immediately at this point, the specifics of like what we do in our specific strategy. But, just a high level answer to that is like most of these manufacturing businesses at the lower market size where search funds operate are, usually treated like a piece of old commercial real estate that you've kind of had for years and you just don't care that, maybe there's trash in the corner or there's this, that, there. It's like, cash flow comes in. It's enough for you to be happy with what, your lifestyle that affords you and you kind of leave it alone. So there is often a lot of like things to clean up, like physically in the facility. But the bigger trend is a lot of owners of this size, just like any self-funded search deal sizes, are kind of the general manager. They do everything. A lot's in their head, and a lot of them did not grow up in the computer generation. So you find that not only is it all in their head, but it's also likely not only written down, and it also not digitized. So you find it very hard to like get the seller's knowledge out so that you can create a more stable business after you buy it. We do a few things to combat that, which I can get into at some point. But definitely, that's a pretty large challenge that I think a lot of small business buyers face.
So, have you? I know you've done 3 acquisitions so far. It looks like I was looking at the notes, and you're still working on. Where you guys are active. Has there been any like really lessons learned before after you've acquired these? Are like, man, now I know the next time I'm going to turn these machines on or test this or do that.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, maybe like case studies on our play. So, like, our goal is to become the largest metal fabrication network in California, if not the West Coast. And to do that, we want to have at least 4 plants under operations ownership by 2028. Each plant doing at least 25 million of revenue. We are finding like way more deal flow than that. I think we can blow past those expectations. We have some advisors as well that are involved that have done the same thing, but before without using outside equity. And I think with using outside equity, we could be faster and bigger. Every time we buy one of these operations, the goal is to get to that 25 million per site. And in order to do that, probably have to buy more than one or pay for a really expensive deal where you already have something at that size. So when we buy these smaller ones, like we started with our first play here in Orange County in Anaheim, where we bought one facility that they did predominantly work for the infrastructure industry. So Southern California is the largest network of roads and bridges in the country, but also rated a C minus by the Society of Civil Engineers. So the Biden infrastructure dollars are putting $5 billion a year down here and over the next 5 years. And we have a lot going on for that business. And what's been interesting in that one, when we got in, we came into a situation where the seller, he was a civil engineer. So, by being an engineer, you're naturally process driven. So I do think that he did that really well. He also had salespeople that ran a lot of the quoting, but like he was still that like VP of sales, head lead that a lot of customers interacted with. And I think in that deal, we definitely learned, don't let a seller leave within 4 months if they are that essential. And that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to move out of state. And we kind of said at the time, yeah, sure. Cause we figured if he was already checked out, then we're not going to get what we need. Anyway, so I thought, I think, going forward after that, we were a lot smarter about that. We, in one of our other deals, which I'll tell you about, we retained the seller fully in a limited capacity and the other one in a little bit more of a limited capacity, but still retained them. So I think, that was probably a good one from the first deal. We also had a bit of like customer concentration in the first deal that we ever bought, which I think, is always tough, right? You have to make sure you're really confident that you could sell more product quickly. But we did combat that by buying a business with about a half year's worth of backlog already signed up. So it did give us some breathing room. And then after that, our second deal, we found that the seller was definitely not a cultural match for the way we wanted to run things. So we definitely implemented a lot of technology very quickly. And he's a paper and pen guy. And that did put us in a position where we had to ask him to leave for a few months and come back actually after. But, after 6 weeks, we were like, he's going to slow down our tech implementation. And he wanted to vacation anyway. So it worked out. And then in our last deal, I think honestly, it was the smallest deal we did, but also probably one of the cleanest, nicest companies we bought. A lot of repeat stuff that they were doing, much more simpler to operate. The only problem that business had was it was small. So I think we kind of got better and better over time. And I can't say every deal we're looking at now is consistently on the up trend, but I think the more data points you have for your new sellers, the more things you can say to them that say, hey, this is why I need you to stay for longer than 4 months. This is why we need you to sell it to us for this price. So I think you just naturally improve your process over time. And if you buy the business right, I think it gets easier to operate and there's less mistakes you have to learn from.
So what type of products these make? When you said industrial, and talked about the roads and stuff, I'm thinking huge products like, bridge trusses and that type of stuff. Or so what type of, in the general, I mean, do you have a different range? Are you guys all in the same kind of industry? Or do all three of them serve vastly different customer bases?
Yeah. So our main holding company for the metal fabrication roll up is called Metal Solutions Holdings. And the premise there is that we work with companies that the main medium of what they do work with is metal, right? So right now it's companies that take raw metal, whether they're sheet metal, block metal, tubular metal, structural steel, I beams, and form them, weld them, bend them, and shape them to different designs that customers provide us. And the first business that we bought, their customer on the infrastructure side is predominantly like they're called heavy civil general contractors, really large general contractors that municipalities trust can handle multi-billion-dollar projects. Usually these are publicly traded, been around for 100 years type customers. We would make parts for them all the way from, they're building a new bridge in California and we would make metal that gets embedded inside of the bridge to provide rigidity from earthquakes, all the way to little drains that you'd see on the ground driving on the side of a highway that then link to a plumbing system that collects the rainwater, all the way to stainless steel, cosmetic architectural metals that would go into like a train station, think benches, bike racks, lockers. And probably our most notable project is at LAX. They're building this people mover before the Olympics in 2028, kind of a tram that you would get on when you land that you would go to a car rental terminal. So we did a lot of metal on that. So part of the track is specialized metal. We did drainage on that, kind of stuff that Californians use every day and don't know that they realize it. So that was our first deal. And I can tell you about the other ones too, as their products were pretty different.
I've looked at a company when I first got in the merger and acquisition space, which really had two businesses inside of it. They made concrete, things like grease traps, culverts, storm shelters and stuff. And then they had a welding shop that was specialized in really heavy duty doors and stuff, right? The welding shop had outside customers because they made doors and hinges and stuff that could handle extreme weights. So they would make, people would order hinges and stuff for their products and their things from this welding shop. and the welding shop actually would run along. They run 2 shifts to kinda keep up with the concrete shop and keep up with the needs of their external customers, and, so it almost anything could be in this space, right? So, there's by no means by saying you're a metal manufacturing roll-up have you limited yourself in any scope. That's why I was asking, is there a narrower industry that you're kinda, looking at? Or is it basically if it makes metal and it's in our geographical area, we're interested in it?
Yeah, it's definitely if it's makes metal and it's we're interested, but there's a little bit of a strategy to it as well. So, when we were buying our first deal, this was like during the tail end of COVID. And a lot of companies that were doing anything to do with like aerospace, a lot of companies that were doing honestly a lot of just general commercial work for machinery manufacturers, a lot of those guys got affected by COVID. Aerospace especially. So like their EBITDAs got depressed. Sellers didn't want to sell. We didn't feel like we could pay a seller based on pre-COVID numbers. So we naturally found ourselves with a deal that grew during COVID. And infrastructure in California actually blew up during COVID because all the lanes were shut down because they weren't being used. So California's government allowed a lot of infrastructure work to get accelerated. So we found a lot of growth from that. And that's why we ended up with the first deal. And infrastructure, I mean, it's literally the oldest industry in history and the one that every time there's an economic issue, the government puts money into infrastructure in order to solve it. So like we felt that that was a good first bet. And then like after the second business we bought, they were a lot more general. They make metal for a lot of different industries, but predominantly wastewater systems. So that was also another thing that it didn't like particularly grow through COVID, but wastewater, people always use the bathroom, and the more you want to reclaim water and be more environmentally friendly, the more you're going to use systems like that. And then the final business we bought was probably the most, I don't know, generic. They just make boxes for electronic enclosures. So, that's kind of, it's kind of steady Eddie, pretty much stayed flat during COVID and so on. And then over time, though, like we're trying to follow sectors that are growing. So defense is one that we definitely want to get into. We're looking at actively looking at acquisitions that would put us in the defense sector. If not, we're going to do it ourselves by getting certifications by the end of the year. And then we're also looking at the high tech and medical industries. So there's other facilities out there, like in the Bay Area and San Diego, that specialize in that I think add an interesting mix. But I also might add, like, I think of metal fab as almost like playing the stock market, where you get to like pick different industries because the medium that you're working with is used by so many, and you can decide your exposure levels that you require based on growth rates in those industries, margins, risk of them going away, stuff like that. So it is pretty broad, but definitely we're trying to move systematic based on what we think is the kinds of deals that are available in a post-COVID world.
Since most of the steel mills are now located overseas in China and stuff, right? Where that really should was affected during the shipping issues during COVID. Was it a problem? Like, has that problem lifted up? I haven't even done the research to figure out if the shipping's back to 100% back to normal or if they're still recovering from all the backlog and craziness that happened during COVID.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that also kind of goes to the reason why we ended up in infrastructure because a lot of infrastructure projects, just like also defense, they do work on the same way. The metal must come from U.S. based mills. You fundamentally almost don't have that issue with China, but there are the standard commercial guys that do metal for equipment, regular equipment, electronic boxes, maybe or something like that. They may have a little bit of difficulty. California, especially Southern California, is a very interesting place where there is so much density of large density of metal fabricators. There's 2,500 just in SoCal, another 4,500 in the rest of the state. That all the distributors have branches here, and they find ways to get material here,
Ah,
even if times are tough.
in most cases, to sell to the local markets, it just was cost prohibitive. It's natural. I see where it's natural that happened, right? You walked into an area that or happened to discover an area where there's just so much manufacturing around that you're not gonna have an issue with supply, you're not gonna have a issue where like, a lot of these guys that have these companies in small town USA, they're the only metal fabrication thing within, 200 miles. They're gonna have bigger problems, so there's a strategic advantage to where you guys are located. Are you considering acquisitions outside of the area, or is the market big enough in your area that's gonna keep you busy for a while?
Yeah, I think in general, the more of a geographical openness that you have, the easier it'll be to like do a volume of deals.
Hmm.
But I would say we're highly, highly, highly biased towards California, if not like within our local area. Just to give you an idea of density out here, like our first acquisition, the guy next door was a machine shop. The guy after that is a sheet metal shop. So, we could have bought up that whole block essentially. We all work on different industries. And then our second acquisition in the business campus that we're in, there's three defense manufacturers in addition to us that all do custom metal parts. There's a lot out here that gives you reason to stay. And it just naturally, from an economic perspective, the synergies are larger if you can join facilities and put them under one umbrella. So that's why we would naturally find ourselves. But if we found like a very well priced deal outside of California, part of our business model is to develop an operating system. We call it like Metal Solutions OS, which is everything from the software that runs a metal shop that we take off the shelf softwares and we customize them and make them all talk to each other, all the way to the business processes so that we can do something remote where we can take a shop in another state, put our process in, and then run it remotely. But the economics have to be there where it makes sense for the travel, makes sense for what it'll do from a roll-up perspective, etc.
What is the current search criteria? What are you looking for right now to complement what you've already bought?
I would say right now we would like to ideally buy a shop that has already been doing defense work. And that would be a big jump start on what we're going to do. But we can get into it ourselves, but much, much easier if they've been already doing parts for a certain set of defense customers over years. So that would be nice. We're actively in conversations with a Bay Area based metal company that would bring us into the semiconductor industry out there. And then we have also been looking at San Diego as well, where we would add more like medical and high precision because there is a lot more of that stuff down there. So those have been our like ideal, call it on the shopping list. But other than that, like we've been called about. I mean, just literally like an hour ago, I got a call from a broker out of Houston with a nice metal shop deal out there that he wants us to look at. And then earlier today was a shop out of Seattle. So we're starting to see that. And naturally, you can expect if you're buying a metal shop out of Seattle, you're probably doing Boeing work. And if you're buying one out of Houston, you're probably doing oil and gas. So that's part of what it is. But the main thing is you want to be diversified in industry and customer base. So we don't want to keep buying up stuff that's similar to what we have because it'll, overexpose us.
So I interviewed recently, probably in the last 6 months, Caroline, who bought, I'm looking it up here, North Star Photonics. It's a defense contracting company who makes fiber optic, you call it not GPS, gyroscopes. Basically, it's a very special gyroscope that doesn't need any type of outside connection to detect which way it's going and velocity and stuff for navigational devices. So it's put on things like airplanes and bombs and stuff. The reason I told you this is one of the things that was a wake up call for her is she bought this division as a carve out from another company. They divested of it, and she had to go through all the certifications. She thought because they've been making this product forever, right, and then they had all these customers were in place that she would be able to move it and just continue building devices. And she had to go out and raise a little bit more money and pretty much save the thing because it took them, I want to say, if I remember right, it was like 6 to 12 months to get the recertification she needed to continue manufacturing her stuff they already knew how to do. So if you wanted an introduction or somebody's already been through it, I'd make that introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those situations can be really tough. I mean, sometimes like I heard a story the other day. Someone bought a business with a manufacturer too, and like a part that the seller said that they were qualified to still make at that facility was no longer in qualification, and they only found that after. So, unfortunately, they had to deal with the seller to get I think an earnout erased or something to compensate for that. So that does happen. You kind of combat that with customer concentration, but also like if you think there is risk towards certs, what we do is you could do a standard stock sale versus an asset sale, and then they have I forget what they always call it, 338H10 or something like that, where it's like a asset sale for tax purposes, but a stock sale and kind of a hybrid of the two. So you do get to keep a lot of that, but it can be tricky. And in general, that's also part of when we started, we tried to avoid stuff with certs and licenses.
Let's talk about, what are the current challenges you guys have as far as is it easy to raise money now, like to do your new acquisitions because you've got a history? Sometimes the things free up a little bit once you've done two or three. Have you found that people are contacting you with metal companies they want to sell, or contacting you because you're doing what you're doing well and might be interested in investing in you?
Yeah, I think, to answer that question in parts, in terms of having credibility with sellers, absolutely. Now what we do is we run a newsletter to sellers about stuff we're doing actively in the business we have now. And hopefully there's like some cultural alignment when they see that. And they go, yeah, I wish my company was done by this. The best thing we hear is like sometimes we'll find a seller that says to us, like, I love what you're doing. If I was younger, I'd be doing exactly the same thing. But I just, I have, I've built up enough net worth not to really need to do that. But B, I just like don't want to do that. And in the years I want to just play golf. We love those. We love those mentality. We try to get those sellers to be kind of engaged with us, give them some economics that make sense. But yeah, definitely it's gotten easier from that perspective. And then the other thing is well, I'm sorry, I should preface that it's gotten easier because we get more deal flow, but harder because we actually know what we're looking for now. And like we when someone sends us EBITDA that we fundamentally know is not true, it's very easy to back that up because we have data from other shops, but also kind of shocking, when we try to explain some of this stuff to sellers that it will cost you, the next buyer, more to run this facility than you, seller, who's done 17 different things. So there is a little bit of that, but so I think that, and then on the money raising front, I think it's definitely gotten easier, especially as we've like firmed up the thesis. I think just like naturally we're like not trying to do deals with heavy amounts of equity required. If we can pull off deals with, majority debt, high amounts of seller notes, things like that, it does lower the equity need. And, you could, depending on the speed that you want to buy them up at, it can come off your balance sheet. It's all about speed. And I think right now, a lot of the investors that have been attracted to what we're doing are excited about like the resurgence of things getting made in the US, but also like the fact that we are probably somewhere in the middle between a private equity and a venture capital play. Then we are standard private equity grow 10% a year situation. So I do think that those things together have definitely brought more interest to what we're doing.
Now, do most of these facilities actually like own their industrial real estate, or do you end up having to buy or negotiate lease structures with the previous landlords?
Yeah, the absolutely. A lot of facilities are owned by our sellers. Sometimes there's a few interesting cases. So if a facility is not owned by the seller, but the lease is expiring soon, usually the seller wants to sell like right up to the day that the lease expires, which is good because they're serious and all that jazz. So we will work on those situations and renew leases or maybe renew them for a little bit and then bring their work into our facility. And if not that, the other kind of phenomenon going on that I think has attracted more investors to what we're doing is the whole West Coast, especially California, is a big hotbed for imports from China and Asia. And the port of Long Beach down here in Southern California is actually one of the largest ports in the country. So as e-commerce has gone up, as all the importing has gone up, that port got busier, which drove the value of industrial buildings in the area to some crazy values. And before you'd have like a warehouse in like Compton or something where it was super cheap. Seller bought it way back when, didn't think much of it. And then all of a sudden now in 2024, they're looking at it and the building is worth 10 times more than the business. And they kind of look at that and say, well, I actually care a lot less about every dollar I get out of the business. I'm a lot more interested in, a good tenant in that building going forward. And if I'm going to sell it, then I, will want to sell it in a way where my workers and my customers are served correctly. And ideally that's done best by a buyer that's local and can absorb that. But yeah, it's always an interesting dynamic to work with a seller that doesn't need the money, right? I think you tend to be a lot more interested in buyer type and what the buyer is going to do rather than squeezing every penny from it. So yeah, and right now we have not bought any real estate. We do sign leases where we have like options to vacate within a few months. But other than that, it's definitely been a lot more of lease it, stay flexible, and then as you start to build up to critical mass, then you'd be open to real estate purchases.
Now comes the question that I prepared you for on our previous call, and you seemed excited to get into this conversation. While everybody's running from California, why in the hell did you decide to buy up companies and stay here?
Yeah, it's we get that question a lot. There's actually a few factors. So to buy a business in California, for starters, you do need to take a bit of a contrarian type thinking, right? Because standard search funds, not only do they tell you not to buy manufacturers, but they also tell you to not buy stuff in California. And there are like private equity funds that actively say they don't want to do anything in California. California has a lot of challenges. Regulatory is definitely one of them. Environmental, I'd say they're on the lower end. The biggest challenge I think that we have here is SG&A labor is very, very expensive, right? For you to get like a plant manager here, maybe almost double what it may cost you in the Midwest, right? And part of that is due to the taxes, part of that is due to the cost of living. But what that does is it like forces a lot of these smaller businesses to reevaluate hiring SG&A labor. So naturally, what happens is the seller and maybe their family members start to do multiple SG&A job roles. Now, you can kind of handle that. You can be both the plant manager, the purchaser, the controller, and the HR manager all in one. But what that's going to do is that's going to limit your scale. So some of the sellers, though, they choose to do that and they try to limit their scale. What that does is it forces the seller to be in a position where they are actively the general manager and they, for that reason, want to be more open to selling. It just wears them down more than like a passive owner. And then the other thing you have going on is California is, part of that, all the news that everyone heard about people moving to Texas and to Idaho. Our sellers, they do want to do that. A lot of them want to do that. 2 out of 3 of our sellers left Idaho. And, for that reason, we have found situations where because they already want to leave the state, you can have a much more flexible deal. You can get more seller finance. You can have a seller that'll stay on remotely. You can do a lot of things that you couldn't do as if the seller was going to like retire in that area and run it and kind of cash flow the business. And kind of they're like, why do they need you type of mindset. But the bigger thing is like, because sellers are being forced to do a lot of the SG&A work themselves, and because the market is very fragmented and concentrated with a lot of smaller businesses, if you can get to scale where you have dedicated enough revenue to support a dedicated amount of middle managers, if you will, for all the different functions, dedicated HR, controller, etc., the regulation almost like in the expense of doing business almost flips on you and almost becomes a moat to your business, where it's very hard for you to get disrupted by mom and pop because you just simply have more internal infrastructure to handle, and eventually they are also going to burn out. And if there's no buyers, then your customers have to go somewhere. The other thing too is we also felt that the work was not going anywhere. California is, like, depending on the year you look at it, the number one manufacturing state in the country. There's a lot of equipment manufacturers out here, a lot of infrastructure work, a lot of defense, and that stuff's not going anywhere, right? It's permanently ingrained in what we do out here. And, for that reason, we felt that if we can just buy up enough businesses to get to scale, to put in all the infrastructure, the work will be there to support it. And our competitors that don't want to sell to us will naturally just go out of business with their customers shifting somewhere. With all the reshoring trends as well, we'll find more and more stuff happening in the US that should also support their growth. So there's a lot of factors, but ultimately, I think you get to scale out here, you're going to be a very rare company.
And I see that. I moved back a couple years ago, and it's extremely hard for somebody to go from 0 to mid-market, but once you're there, it seems like everything's a little easier for the big guys. California's really geared towards that mid-market and upper market business. And the politicians, I guess, are afraid to run those guys off. They leave too. I mean, you look at some, a lawn pole business is out of here. And it kind of opened my eyes too. It's like, because when I first came here, it's like I told everybody, it's like, yeah, I'm still in mergers and acquisitions. I live in California, but I'm not buying anything here. Right. And now I'm looking at things like, okay, what would it take to make this worth being here, right? It needs to be not a 10-person company anymore, a 20-person company. It needs to be, or a $5 million company. It needs to be a $25 million company. And if I buy something, how do I get it there? How do I get it to 150, 200 employees, fully run? Something that the state would need me to, or the county would want me to keep there because it was a significant impact to the county. Those are the type of businesses that tend to stick around and have gravity, I guess you would call, whatever the word I'm looking for, have a little bit of influence in the local markets and stuff because they're significant enough to the local markets that any of the powers to be would want them to be there.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the what's interesting too is like what we've tried to focus on in terms of the actual products are products that have to be made in California. Usually like infrastructure projects, they almost always have some high percentage mandate on local businesses, but also the parts that we tend to do are not contract manufacturing run parts. They are parts that at least before we get into defense work are, you order them one by one, a few $1,000 here and there. All of a sudden you're doing a million or two with a customer by the end of the year. But those are parts that like, they're so cheap that, and they're one-offs that you're not going to send it to another state because you're not going to get it back in time, nor are you going to get the price that you want after shipping. But typically, like our customers will build the bones, let's say on the machinery side, out of state somewhere, out of state, out of country even. And then all the things that they make, since it's a, B2B piece of equipment, get light customization. And we will deal with the light customization parts that come at the very end where speed and efficiency really matter. So I think that's just, what you have to cater towards. And in this day and age, people pay for speed all the time, right? So we don't try to be the cheapest price. We're actually definitely not the cheapest price in what we do. We do focus on quality and speed for sure. And I think that those are recipes that will be permanently needed in California.
So convenience, we all pay for it, right? We become an instant gratification nation. That's why Amazon is what it is today. So it's cool that you also looked at speed and convenience of being able to develop industrial parts, right? If somebody orders something and it doesn't quite work the way they want, and they've tried to install it, in a lot of cases, they've shut down a factory line or something to put something in place. If something's not working and they need a custom part to make it work, they're not going to wait for somebody in Kansas to get the engineering diagrams, make it, ship it, and get it to you. They're going to go to somebody local and go, "Here's a problem I have. What can you do?" And you guys would be able to go, "We can get that to you by Friday," right? And it's endless to what you guys can acquire and build. And are most of these here's the one thing I don't know about some of this industrial manufacturing. If somebody comes to you with an engineering plan and they want to build something, is it easy for you guys to do that, or is there certain components and parts for you guys that just says, okay, if it's this type of thing, we have a CNC machine that can cut, or we have the devices that cut 2-inch plate steel, we can make a grate for a drainage, or is it more along the lines where they have to hunt down a specific company that's capable of making every single part?
Yeah, it definitely is different. The okay, so these small shops, they typically have a center of competence, if you will. Typically, we'll see shops that they just do machining, right? Where they take like a block of metal and then form, remove metal from that block to form a custom shape. We have other shops that just do sheet metal, right? So sheet metal, you're not going to use in structural applications. It's going to be more aesthetic and more boxes. CNC, you may use like a custom part that goes in an airplane that you want to save weight from. There are other companies that they just do like structural steel, big, heavy welded assemblies that maybe, only certain industries use. So part of the play here too is to combine those together. So when your customer comes to you, you do have, one-stop shopping, and it's like a 1+1 is equal to 3 instead of 2, kind of in regards to the total market that you can capture, right? So yeah, there's definitely some of that going on. I also think that there is this like extra layer that like if you go on a metal fabricator's website, you don't really gather. Like there are certain parts that like people do really, really well. One really odd one for us is so we make a good chunk of the toilets that go into the Metro North trains in New York. So when you go from Grand Central up, you flush the toilet. It's not the toilet that somebody would sit on. It's the metal that's all the way in the back of the train that collects all the wastewater. And then we make the clean water system. And this toilet is a part that we've had for like 20 something years that for some odd reason, the customer who is in Syracuse, the little polar opposite part of the US, needs to source from us because we do it really, really well. And oftentimes when we buy these metal shops, it's like discovering gold or something. You find, this one part that they've just been doing really, really well. There's one welder in the back that just is the only one who's allowed to do it. Over time, if you can assemble customers like that, where you make that part and you're uniquely known for it, you're going to have a really strong revenue quality where that customer cannot get off you even if they wanted to. So yeah, we do see that, but it's just about like, how do you keep that consistent? How do you make sure that welder doesn't quit? How do you make sure that competency doesn't leave the business?
What does the future look like? What is your total vision? What are you trying to where are you headed with this?
Yeah. So, the kind of the minimum goal for us is 2028, 4 plant, 25 million revenue per plant, 100 million revenue group for group. I think we can do a lot more than that. I think, a big focus for, this year has been on pushing towards middle market banking size, which allows you to do a lot more than if you were in a middle market banking, loan programs, access to credit lines, access to acquisition credit lines. So there's a lot of that in like the immediate short term. But I do think that we can get past like a lot of these goals because honestly, there's just so many metal shops out there, right? If we wanted to, we could figure out strategy to buy them all. The thing that always makes it difficult is when you don't have a playbook. So what we've spent a lot of time on the last like 6 to 12 months is establishing that playbook. If we bought a metal shop tomorrow, in, let's say like Texas, right? What exactly are we going to do, right? What do we need? Who are the hires that are needed there? What are their SOPs and KPIs to their jobs? How do we get them trained? What's the software that we roll out so we can manage that business from anywhere and keep people accountable? How do we deal with the marketing? How do we deal with the business development? What are the things that we continue to do at our holding company level versus on site, et cetera. So, I think that is like, immediate short-term strategy so that we can get to and blow past that 100 million, revenue goal. And I think, over time, like once you understand this stuff, you could always expand to other verticals in manufacturing. There's a lot of other things that are similar to metal fab, custom made anything, if it's out of metal or whatever. But, we are pretty focused on metal now, as that's where synergies are naturally going to happen.
Now, I'm not expecting you to give me the exact numbers or anything because I know that's proprietary, but what is the industry margin, profit margin for a metal factory, and can you guys beat that? So I looked at, the data that's out there and says steel manufacturing companies have a standard profit margin across the industry at, 6% or 8% or whatever it happens to be. Do you know what that number is, what the industry average is?
Yeah. So typically when you deal with, like material pricing, or pricing, your quotes. The way it breaks down is you typically have the highest markup on your labor versus materials. So if you think of it that way, the larger amount of material cost in a job, typically the lower you're going to find margins. So if you think about industries where they use a lot of metal, such as let's say structural steel, you're going to find that those are going to be lower margin industries and probably be closer to like a 10%, something like that, in a decently run structural steel situation. Now, if you're doing like, polar opposite, where you're machining a very complex small assembly, right? You're going to be almost doing margins like iPhones, right? Where you can get to like, I don't know what Apple's doing, but we've seen shops where they're holding like 20 to 25%, right? Because it's small, complex, right? But you can also do a lot more in an existing facility if your product's smaller. And then there's everything in between. So, if you're doing all the different, fabrication, services in house, you can run high teens to low 20s, in a healthy shop all day on from an EBITDA margin perspective. But there's also like a big caveat as well is like you do have to keep within certain, operating leverage hurdles, right? So with most metal shops, you go from like 0 to 5 million of revenue, and at 5 million of revenue, that's like your peak operating leverage. And then you got to reinvest a lot of that back to then get to 10 million in revenue. And then from 10 to like 20, you got to reinvest almost all your EBITDA back to then go back up again. So it really depends where you hold the business. And that's why we like to take that diversify the plant strategy, because that at 25, you can maximize your operating leverage. And if you just leave it alone, you can have good profitability.
Yeah, I realize that the infrastructure to build some of this stuff is outrageous, right? The machines you need to machine parts and to CNC cut in different devices, and there's everything from plasma devices that cut things to things that cut metal with water, right? Um,
Yeah.
so is that's what is it the machinery that's causing what's I guess the real question I have is what is the biggest expense when you're looking at a manufacturing company? Is it employment, machinery, or is it raw materials as far as like your when you go into your cost of goods sold?
So materials, are a large part of it, but it definitely is, labor, right? The nice thing about California too is, you can typically pass on direct labor to your customer. The customer will pay higher prices for direct labor because they want to get it faster. They just won't pay higher prices because your SG&A costs are higher here. That's usually the harder one to eat. Because like you could always show the customer your bid and say, hey, I have to charge you 120 an hour versus in a I don't know, Texas, it might be 95 an hour because it does cost more money to have an operator here, versus in Texas. So like, stuff like that's usually fine. But material markups, I mean, for what we do, I would say, they're not crazy. The one thing that does naturally happen when you get to scale is you can afford to have a purchasing manager in your business. So our guys, when they quote, they always quote material buys as if you bought it just for that job, but then a purchasing manager bulk orders. So then you naturally have a little bit of a win baked in. But even then, materials isn't that large to be super impactful. It's really just being efficient about the amount of hours you got to put into a job and making sure you quote that correctly. And then, making sure you're dealing with customers that appreciate those prices that don't, they will pay for the speed and quality versus try to beat you down on it. Um, and then, after that, you just have to be smart about where you hold your operating leverage so that your SG&A fixed costs don't end up killing off all your EBITDA.
So I work with a small group of buy up manufacturing companies in the woodworking space, so cabinetries and that type of stuff. One of the things we definitely evaluate is where is the current capacity of the manufacturing. What are they doing in house? What are they outsourcing? And if we doubled them overnight, what would be the first thing that broke? Do you do a lot of that analysis when you're looking at these deals? Like, hey, if we grow this from, let's just say, 10 million to 20 million, what's the first thing that's going to fail? You take a look at that when you're looking.
Yeah. Usually the thing that fails is people and process. It's almost always guaranteed. Process because they literally have no process. The only process that these companies typically have is through osmosis, learning from the seller. And like that only gets you so far because going from like a 10 to 20 is a pretty significant jump because you're gonna have to start having quality departments, to just handle more quality issues that naturally happen when you get to scale. Um, Quality departments force a quality mindset on the shop floor, which forces you to now have a process. Like you can't keep your cells dirty before you can keep them dirty. Just a lot of things. I mean, we're seeing it now with some of our, our stuff too. But there's definitely a lot of those investments that you have to make in the people. But then you can't just hire people. You can't just go out and hire yourself a quality manager and not have a process ahead of time for them because most quality managers, they don't want to build a process. Most people don't want to go to a job and build a department. Basically, they want to have that baked out for them. So there's that interesting challenge of you as the holdco having to like figure out the process if you don't already have it, and then injecting somebody to just manage it going forward. So it's usually that facilities. You can usually double up to triple up shifts. I mean, metal fab is notorious for like, people can woodwork. You can find operators all over the clock, even work weekends. So ideally, your plant's on 24/7. And then equipment, like a lot of what we make right now is made with like old school equipment that's not going to go out of fashion anytime soon, like welding, fabrication machines, bending machines, stuff like that. They're not expensive machines. It's more of like the service aspect of it. That's what drives um, you know, the value on it. So capex and stuff like that can be low even if they do break. But so that's why I definitely start the answer with people and process. It's usually not the first thing that people think.
Do you get into anything that's like really precision, or you guys have any of the companies yet where they make precision parts? Like I know where my grandfather worked, I got to tour that place a few times. I mean, they were making precision gears and I mean, they made everything that went in those bomb launchers, down to the gears, down to they even had a thing that would wind steel cable for like to turn some certain things, whatever. They made their own custom cables and stuff for this device. They ordered some of it out, of course, but certain things were custom made inside of there, or at least they would cap the cables and make the big ball at the end of it. Because I watched them, take a piece of cable and make the steel ball that goes into the receiver piece. But do you guys do any really high precision work, or is it all, or do you have a company like that yet?
No, and nothing really high precision. I mean, we do some machining. It's like as precise as you get, but precision is its own animal, right? A lot more quality control standards. It's just a different kind of culture you want in the company. In general, any company we own, we want to have a quality process. So it's not like we're skipping that, but precision is going to likely be its own plant, whether it's in San Diego or somewhere else. I mean, precision is typically required more in medical and medical and medical, aerospace, and some defense. It's space for sure.
Mhm.
So we're not really exposed to those industries right now really heavily, but over time we will buy something.
Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate the time you spent with me today. I've learned a lot, and I want to keep going because I'm curious about this space. Right, I've got this curiosity about what you're building, and you know, I'm one of the guys that'll I'll get lost on Discovery Channel on how things are made shows. So it just fascinates me, and to some extent, thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for keeping jobs here in California. being here in California, the economy is suffering enough. So keeping people employed here helps the entire economy, helps the home prices stay reasonable, helps maybe they're still inflated, but we don't want mass exodus, because then you end up with places like Chicago and stuff where the housing market goes from what was decent to big vacancies and just, dilapidated properties and just destroyed neighborhoods. We're seeing that some in some of these cities here. We need more people with the same mindset you have. So I'm just trying to acknowledge you for doing what you're doing and for keeping businesses here, keeping employment here, and thinking outside of the box, right? That's what it takes when the tide's going out and you're trying to swim in. Thinking of it a different, thinking a different way to get things done. If more people did that, I think this state has a better chance of succeeding and correcting some of the problems we're having. And hopefully, as time passes, we'll elect different people with different mindsets, and maybe somebody will come in that's a little more business minded and help us out.
Yeah. The interesting thing a lot of people don't know is California is the fifth largest economy in the world, just the state alone. And there's so much going on here. I don't think it's like ever going to leave. We just the more we deregulate and the easier we make it to do business, I think the more we can get done here. But there's good people, good resources. So we're really excited for the future. We're really excited for continuing to develop what we're doing out here. And always love to have good people, even from other states, fly out here and join us and so on. We're pumped for that.
Can't beat the beauty of the weather and the nature and the different things here. San Diego is absolutely beautiful. Keeping the state viable business wise is, critical. Like you said, it's one of the largest economies in the world. And if we destroy that economy, all we're doing is, making the world a worse place, making bigger problems for everybody. It doesn't help anybody in the United States if California has a rough time. So that said, thank you again. Thank you for your time. Hang out for a few minutes, and we'll call that a show.
Yeah, appreciate it. It was great to be on.
I want to announce our new channel partners, the ITX Marketplace. Since 1998, ITX has created $5 billion in value by selling more than 225 IT businesses in 20 countries. ITX works exclusively with IT-enabled businesses generating between $5 million and $30 million who are ready to be sold, and M&A decision makers who are ready to buy. For over 25 years, ITX has developed industry knowledge that helps determine whether a seller is a good fit for their buyers before making the match. ITX Mergers and Acquisition Marketplace we have partnered with has a proprietary database of 50,000 plus global buyers seeking IT service firms, managed service providers, Microsoft service providers, software as a service platforms, and channel partners with Microsoft, Oracle, ServiceNow, and the Salesforce space. If you have an IT-enabled business you're ready to sell, I want you to visit the itexchangenet.com/marketplace. How to exit. That link will be in the show notes. Visit them now.